Topping our politics lead now, a Republican face-off in Arizona could foreshadow the 2024 presidential primary race. The state's upcoming Republican primary for governor has quickly morphed into something of a bitter proxy war between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence, as CNN's Kyung La reports.
A showdown in the desert over the future of the Republican Party. Mike Pence and Donald Trump at odds yet again, this time in the hotly contested GOP primary for Arizona governor. The former president has endorsed Republican candidate Kari Lake.
She is my complete and total endorsement.
A former Republican.
I registered as a Republican.
Turned independent.
I was really fed up.
Turned Democrat.
I registered as a Democrat.
Turned Republican again.
The Republican Party, party of solutions.
Her campaign is centered on the lie that Donald Trump beat Joe Biden.
We may not be able to save the whole U.S. as long as that illegitimate president's in the White House.
She spouts far-right conspiracies.
We had major election fraud. 200,000 minimum ballots were trafficked by mules. I'm Kari Lake.
Like Trump, Lake made her name on television. The former Arizona local news anchor has also borrowed from his playbook, frequently attacking those in her old profession.
Fake news here, by the way. I got ambushed by CNN outside.
I think Kari Lake has what it takes to get us to where we need to get back on track for our families and gives us hope.
Lake has a message for a base and only that group. The question is that group large enough to win the Republican nomination?
How are you?
Republican gubernatorial candidate Karen Taylor Robson, another leading contender for the GOP nomination, says it's not.
How do you run against an opponent who is backed by a popular former president?
If you like Donald Trump's policies and record of limited government, low tax, pro-business environment, and somebody with a track record of success, I'm your candidate. If you want somebody who is a big personality, then Kari Lake is your candidate.
Robson's strategy to win the GOP nomination is to consolidate support of traditional conservatives, helped by Pence's Friday rally.
Arizona needs Karen Taylor Robson.
Robson also has the support of Arizona's outgoing Republican Governor Doug Ducey, who attacked Lake's support for Trump as a matter of political convenience.
Kari Lake's misleading voters with no evidence. She's been tagged by her opponents with a nickname, Fake Lake, which seems to be sticking.
Thank you.
A delicate dance for Robson. Courting the right wing means sowing doubts about the 2020 election.
Where are you on the 2020 election?
At a minimum, the election was not fair. And I know people want to hear a different answer from me. But when you take a look at, there was concern from a lot of voters.
When you look at the primaries we just went through in some of these other states, I think messages to take away from that are certainly the Donald Trump endorsement is a powerful asset, but it's not the silver bullet.
Arizona's primary will be another signal for national Republicans. Kyung La, CNN, Phoenix.
All right, thanks to Kyung La for that report. Let's discuss. Scott Jennings, let's start with you. What do you make of this proxy war in Arizona? We're seeing it there. We saw it earlier in Georgia with, again, Trump backing the person that was all in on full election lies versus the incumbent governor who Pence supported.
Yeah, dynamics here are a little bit different. In Georgia, Pence had the upper hand, supporting Brian Kemp, who was far ahead. In this case, Trump's endorsed candidate, Lake, according to some of the polls, is slightly ahead, although I think it's an extremely close race. Pence is aligned here with the outgoing Republican governor, Doug Ducey, who's an extremely conservative guy, but he also, came under Trump's negative gaze for not doing what he wanted him to do on election stuff. I mean, I think as much as this is a race in the moment, it is a little bit of a proxy for the argument to come from Mike Pence, which is, we're going to have to get back to a Republican Party that is focused on the future and not relitigating over and over endlessly the 2020 election. And if you listen to his speech today, he was really not focused on Donald Trump at all, but really focused on conservative issues and taking traditional conservative shots at Robson's opponent, Lake. So I think this is a bit of a setup for his argument to come in his race for president in 2024.
And Casey, take a listen to Katie Hobbs this morning on CNN. She's the Arizona Secretary of State. She's the Democrat running for, she hasn't won the nomination yet, but likely will be the Democratic nominee for governor. She says that there really actually isn't that much of a difference between the two Republican candidates, even though one's deeply all in on the lies and the other one is, playing footsie with them. Take a listen.
There's very little difference between either of these candidates on their policy positions. Even Karen Taylor Robson said in an interview last week that she couldn't name a single policy difference. She too has called into question the 2020 election and has refused to say if she would accept both the results of the 2022 election or certify the 2024 election if she is governor.
Is she right?
Well, Jake, I mean, let's be honest about why she's saying that. It's because she knows she'll probably have to run against either one of them, and it's in her interest. It's going to be harder for her to run against Robson if she wins the nomination, so she's trying to make them look equally extreme. I do think that there is a substantive difference, even though, yes, playing footsie with the election lies obviously is problematic. There are clearly Republican candidates who are trying to put Trump in the past. They're trying to say, okay, voters, we get your concerns, but we got to move forward, right? I mean, that's Mike Pence's entire argument, as opposed to candidates like Kari Lake, who are really hung up on what Trump's hung up about, which is the 2020 election. So, I do think there's a material difference, and I think Ms. Hobbs knows that it's going to be a lot easier for her to run against Kari Lake than against Robson.
And as a Democrat, I think Hobbs should be forced to answer the question about why the Democrat, if she's so upset about election denialism and the fate of our democracy, why are the Democrat committees spending money to get Lake the nomination out there? I mean, they're for Lake. Trump's for Lake. So, I mean, to me, this is mass hypocrisy.
Well, no, because they think that she's easier to beat.
Is that okay?
I mean,
Is that okay?
Like, I don't.
He's playing with fire.
I don't. Yeah, I mean,
the dog's going to catch the car.
It's
in
not.
one of these
It's
cases.
not immoral. I mean, it might be a bad strategy, but there's nothing immoral about it. I think
That's what Claire McCaskill did with Todd Aiken. She
Yeah,
helped
I don't-
him face resume. He was an easier
picking your
candidate to beat.
opponent.
But
Yeah.
yes, it is playing with fire.
Yeah,
But what
so
do you
it
what
made
about
fire.
what about you? Do you think there's a big substantive difference on these conspiracy theory election lie stuff?
I think there's a substantive difference between being all in on the idea that the election was stolen and basically being all in on MAGA, which is what we have with Kari Lake. I mean, it's not just this. She's just all in on whatever Trump's doing and however Trump approaches things, right? So I think there is a difference. I still think it's highly problematic that even the candidates that are supposed to be the sane ones feel compelled to pretend that the election might have been, like something might have gone wrong. I mean, this is insane.
And you saw this in Georgia, where even people like Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger, who held the line and were stalwart about the integrity of the election, then came forward and supported all these changes to election law that were really not necessary to make, given the fact that they endorsed how substantive and clear and fair and forthright their election was.
Right. There was really no justification for all the changes in election laws that Republicans pushed through in Georgia, other than to try to appease that base we've been talking about. And so even with Kemp and Raffensperger, they stood up to Trump. They said the election was not stolen. Joe Biden won. But then in some ways, they still caved to the base. In some ways, they still adhered to the principles of the election lies, even if they said the election lies weren't true, they still adhered to those principles. And we're seeing that in so many states because, as Casey said, these Republican candidates don't think they can win the primary without doing that.
Can't. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, this is what Donald Trump has unleashed, right? I mean, the difference between him and all of the Republican nominees of the past was that instead of acknowledging that there was an element to the party that wanted this kind of thing, I mean, look at John McCain and Sarah Palin. I mean, I think they would look back and say that was a mistake, but he would at least stand up and push back against the element of the party. Trump unleashed it, enabled it, talked to the farthest fringes, to the, frankly, white supremacists, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And now that's given all of them permission, and it's put Republican candidates, I mean, this is the challenge for everyone that claims that they want to restore the Republican Party after Trump, is that it is very hard when 30% of the party is this way to actually win a primary in a different kind of way.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that Donald Trump had a turnkey operation. Basically, this was set up by Republicans, by all these good Republicans who have been talking about election fraud for as long as I have been involved in politics, who have been claiming that Democrats have been stealing elections for as long as I have been following politics. So Donald Trump walked into a slipstream where it was all set up and everybody was already primed to believe that this is what Democrats do. I mean, we could go through all the different phony, controversies that happened.
Right? That goes all the way back to the South and Jim Crow.
But even, I'm talking even in more recent times, Acorn. I mean, the obsession over Acorn, those kinds of things. So there's always been this idea that Democrats steal elections. And so Donald Trump stepped into that. Yes, he's responsible for this, but we shouldn't pretend that the Republican Party writ large hasn't been telling the story for a really long time.
Tia, I just